or at least I hope we are. I hit the button. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our 6th webinar in the 2021 Volunteer Engagement Webinar Series. My name is Sydney Shuttro, and I'm the Director of Volunteer Engagement at the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disability. And I'm excited to talk to you guys about staff and volunteer relations getting buy-in support. I always like to do a little disclaimer before these webinars that everything we're going to talk about today is really kind of best practice, things that we've learned through research. And by no means are you required to implement any of these ideas or strategies in your volunteer program. If you do see an idea that you really like and want to implement, we strongly encourage you to talk with your supervisors and whoever your upper management is to make sure that everything is in line and you're good to go moving forward and have all those permissions and things in place. And I am not by any means or stretch of the imagination a volunteer expert, but I'm lucky enough to have found my passion, and thank you all for indulging me in that passion and talking to you about volunteer engagement. So I never really left, but I'm back, you know. Hopefully that's not too creepy. But I'm really thankful for the 4 guest speakers who took time out of their busy schedule these last 4 months to talk to us about their volunteer management experience and some of the really great ideas and methods that they've used to improve their programs. So if you weren't able to listen in on the past 4 months, we had our own Keita Cole and Tika Moten who helped us out a couple months back. And then we had a few guest speakers from other states. We had Alex Ropes from Washington State, who was with the Humane Society. And we had Dr. Paul Falkowski, who's kind of his expertise is in online training that we had last month. So if you missed any of those presentations, they're all on our YouTube channel, and I encourage you guys to go back and listen to those if you have the time. Also, if you know any really good guest speakers that you'd like to see speak to us on the series next year, please let me know. You can type that into the chat, or you can shoot me an email, whichever is easiest. Well, I should have said before I suggested new speakers, I hope you all want this series to continue into 2022. That's my hope. If not, let me know in a constructive criticism kind of way. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue this for many years to come. For the remaining 4 webinars this year, I'm going to be your presenter, so you'll be able to listen to me. Yay, I know you all missed me. But I do want to remind you all that this webinar series this year is only going to go until September. And you know, last year we did it all throughout the year, January to December. We noticed a huge significant decrease in registrations in the fall of 2020, mainly because holidays and end of the year reports, and fall seems to be a prime time for some conferences. So just kind of a quick reminder that we're going through September. We'll have the fall off, but then we'll be back in January. So today, or this month, we're really going to focus on getting buy-in, and we're also going to talk about the staff and volunteer relations for our volunteer programs. So what exactly is buy-in, and what do we mean when we say buy-in? So the definition of buy-in is the acceptance of and willingness to actively support and participate in something. There are 4 key words that I really want to emphasize and get us to come together to keep in mind as we go through the different groups of people and individuals that we want to get buy-in from. So the first words, I guess, are acceptance and willingness. So anyone we need buy-in from needs to acknowledge the huge undertaking it is to develop and maintain a volunteer program and be ready to do things to help. So I've had people tell me things like, all you have to do is tell someone to help with a project and they will. Easy peasy. If it was that easy, we'd have little to no problems in the world, and none of us would be frustrated and finding different ways to recruit volunteers, right? It's not as easy as that. Everyone who would, have a meal, be able to get a ride to the doctor, have those social connections and relationships. So once we make people understand that it's not as easy as telling, say, a participant at a senior center to call another member and check in on them, we'll be able to do so many more things. being active. Not only do we need people to talk the talk, but we need people to walk the walk, right? Many of us are lucky to have the buy-in already from our supervisors and managers and boards and all of those individuals, who also know that it's not easy. They understand that we're having a huge undertaking doing our volunteer programs. They tell us how important the programs are, but we really need them, if they're not already, to go kind of a step further and be active in our maybe communications, our networks, and our outreach and things of that nature. Support is another key word, and this comes in so many different ways. We need support to try new things, or financial support. That's really easy to get, isn't it? Time, maybe at staff or board meetings, encouragement when things are not going well, advice, sending us things that we request, like data and contacts. And sometimes we need people's support by telling us that we need a little break. So yeah, you're doing a lot. We're seeing that you're getting a little burned out. Maybe you need to take a couple days off. So any kind of support that can be given is really, really important when we get buy-in. And then we need those individuals. This kind of goes back to walking the walk, but do the people that we seek buy-in from know what we do? Have they volunteered to deliver a meal or give a ride? Maybe ask our coworkers to make sure they say hi to a volunteer that's coming in, or ask our directors to make opening remarks at training. So people want to participate. They want to feel like they're part of the process. And once they've had that firsthand experience, their buy-in can really grow, and we'll get more of that support and acceptance, and they're going to be more active. So I started the series last year for a few reasons, and buy-in was really one of them. I was fairly new to the position. I wanted to reach more people at the local levels for all of our programs, who I may not have been able to meet face-to-face in a timely manner. Of course, then COVID happened, right? So now I know it's going to be a while before I come and see all of you, or many of you anyway, face-to-face. And kind of from personal experience, maybe some of you experienced this as well. I hope not, but it's out there. But when I first started working in the Aging Network back in 2010, I got some pushback that volunteers were not really needed or wanted or even important for that matter. So it took time and advocacy, but I managed to educate or pester, if you ask, depending on who you ask, depending on, a lot of people around me about the importance of volunteers. So I think COVID has really shined a light on our volunteer programs, their values, the necessity that they are to our services to be able to deliver everything that we're able to do. So now is really, really a time that we can really emphasize our volunteers and get that buy-in, now probably more than ever. So I just wanted to kind of throw it out there that if you haven't felt buy-in, you don't feel like you have support from anyone or few people, and I know we all have our different support systems, but I do want to be a source of that buy-in. I am bought into this 100%. So if you ever need me for anything, please don't hesitate to ask. And also, if you have any stories or anything that you want to share with the group, feel free to type those in the chat box. We'll have a couple times throughout the presentation to get personal stories, and don't forget to mute yourself as well. So we're going to be asked a lot of questions about why certain groups or individuals should care about our volunteer programs. So we who work in the field every day think it's obvious. We can't do nearly as much without our volunteers' help. So as we seek the buy-in, we need to ask ourselves a few questions to be prepared and have a strategy to achieve the buy-in that we seek. So the first thing we have to do is we have to know our goals. Working with so many programs, it's hard for me to really articulate accurately, what the overall goals are for our agency. However, when we're able to look at each individual program, those goals get somewhat easier to identify. So when we want to ensure that every adult has access to a nutritious meal, education to prevent a fall, a reliable mode of transportation to get to essential services, a non-biased source of healthcare information, an advocate for residents of long-term care facilities, so on and so forth. Overall, if we look at our 20,000-foot view, our program's goals strive to make the lives of older adults easier. More specific you can get, the better. Though it's also important to note, and we've talked about this many times, and I do kind of like to hammer this one home, a large group of volunteers may not be what's needed to achieve these goals. Sometimes a small group of dedicated volunteers will go a long way, and it's not going to be as much turnover that you would have necessarily with a larger group of volunteers. So keep that in the back of your mind, that as you go through all these goals, you know, if you want to reach a certain number of people served or meals delivered, you might not need 100 volunteers. You might just need 25 dedicated individuals. Also, do you know your organization, or do you even have one? This is your organization, or you have a philosophy on volunteer engagement, a personal philosophy, an organizational one as a whole? I haven't seen one specifically for any of our programs or organizations. I could be very wrong in that. So if you do have an organizational or a personal volunteer engagement philosophy, please let me know. Send it to me. I'd love to see it. I started putting one together for myself personally. I haven't made it really coherent enough to share with the group yet, but one day I will. But a philosophy in terms of volunteer engagement is just a clear statement of the rationale for the involvement of volunteers and how they fit into our organizational structure. So not only this is why we need volunteers and this is why volunteers are so important, but how are we going to include that in our overall or organizational structure? How are we going to include them in the culture of our organization? This sets the foundation for volunteer engagement and gets everyone to know volunteers are here to stay and they need to be supported. I missed a golden opportunity this year, and I'm going to throw all the cards here out on the table and let you all know that I messed up. I'm kicking myself in the butt for it. But this year, we're looking to update our organizational strategic plan for the next 5 years. I could give you every excuse in the book on why I didn't take this opportunity, but I'm not going to do that. But I did not propose any specific initiatives for our volunteer engagement in our 5-year strategic plan. So when yours comes up, do as I say, not as I do, I guess I should say. But it's really important. Sorry, we got some static coming in. I'm going to try and mute that person. But it's really important, if we're able to include volunteers specifically in those strategic planning goals. This is a document that shows your governing body, your staff, the volunteers, and the public what we hope to accomplish in the next 5 years. So if your strategic plan comes up, depending on which organization you're in, it could be, you know, every couple of years, every 5 years. But try and include some volunteer goals in strategic plans when they come in, so we're prepared for that buy-in, and we really can show that volunteers are integrated in our organizational structure. So of course, we're going to have some barriers to buy-in, right? Said this many times before. When I do presentations, I kind of like to start with the negative side of things and then end on a positive note. So we're going to kind of go with the bad side of it and the reasons why we don't get the buy-in that we want and why it's sometimes hard to get it. So one of the big barriers in the research shows that paid staff may possibly, and not ever, this is kind of generalized, so I'm not saying every paid staff person feels this way or anything like that, but there is a trend that staff members may feel threatened because, or threatened when they're being told or asked to work with volunteers. So some common fears that paid staff may have are volunteers are going to take paid jobs. They're going to try and gun for my job. They're going to just do a bad job. Volunteers aren't trained, or they do it differently than what I do. I'll look less effective because the volunteers are doing a great job. So our volunteer is going to shine and kind of make us not look as good. Volunteers are spies. You know, Sydney wants me to work with a volunteer so she can get the inside scoop and the dirt on me. They don't know much, and I'll have to train them from scratch, which is very time consuming. They can't be controlled. Volunteers are different from me. Insert your own demographic or characteristic. This volunteer is too young, this volunteer is too old, you know, whatever kind of, like I said, insert your own characteristic or demographic in there. They gossip. I've never learned anything about volunteer management, so I don't know how to work with a volunteer. All they want to do is talk, and they don't want to work, and so much more. So of course, as I stated some of those things, hopefully some of you, and I could kind of feel it, kind of rolled your eyes, right? That's common misconceptions, but the ideas are kind of in the back of people's minds sometimes. So that's some of the barriers, and we're going to talk about how we can kind of debunk a lot of those here coming up. But the barriers don't always just come from staff. It takes two to tango. And it could be that the volunteers may cause some tension. I feel like you have my office bugged. Well, I don't, for just so you know, I don't have your office bugged. At least I don't think I do. But it's not just staff. So volunteers also have some hesitancy and some barriers to buy into our program. Some volunteers may think I'm more qualified than the paid staff person who hasn't had a volunteer that thinks they know more than you do. If you haven't, congratulations. I've dealt with many of them. Staff to be grateful that I'm here. The employees are different than me. Again, insert your own demographic characteristic, like you did with the employees. I'm doing the employee's job. What do they even do if I'm doing everything that they're supposed to do? I never get asked to participate in planning. I only get told what to do. Employees take the credit for my ideas. I should be treated special because I'm someone's relative. I want a title. I don't want to just be called a volunteer, and so much more. So there's some hesitancy on the volunteer side. And then you also have some tensions that become between volunteers themselves. So it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with staff. It could be volunteer tensions with each other. So if a group of volunteers is being recognized for maybe a certain length of time or service, and other volunteers aren't recognized because they haven't had that length of service, but they've been really impactful. So they might get some tension, or I don't want to necessarily call it jealousy, but it could be jealousy, that one group is being kind of praised while the other group isn't. Having a higher status for some volunteers over others. For example, maybe volunteers are at a higher status who do fundraising activities over those who give direct services. Perpetuating gender or age divisions. So as we look at our volunteer teams, do we have all the ladies together, all the guys together, all the millennials together, all the boomers together, or are we really working on getting that intergenerational and kind of everybody working together as a team? Asking for more input from longer term volunteers and asking new volunteers for their input. I've been guilty of that. You know, older, or I shouldn't say older volunteers, our more veteran volunteers may have more experience in the program, and I probably do this too often. But you know, they have the experience, so I ask for their opinions, and I really need to get more input from the newer volunteers. So that could cause some tension between the volunteers themselves. Now we're going to focus on more of the positive stuff and how we can debunk all of that. But who do we want to get buy-in from? Most of our concerns that we just mentioned can easily be avoided and debunked. So we can do this by getting the buy-in we need from specific groups or just groups or individual people. We're going to talk about 3 key sources of buy-in and how we can encourage them to be more involved in our program. So we're going to look at our governing body. We're going to look at our staff, and we're also going to look for buy-in from our volunteers. So these are the 3 main sources that we're going to look at for our buy-in. Of course, there are many, many more sources of buy-in. You can get it from your community. You can even, instead of saying staff in general, you can go supervisors and co-workers. But these are really the 3 of the core groups that we want to get some buy-in from. So we're going to talk about these guys individually. So first, our governing body. We're going to start at kind of the very top and kind of work our way down, so to speak. So starting with our governing body, we need buy-in. And this could be viewed in a number of different ways from our governing body, I guess, can be viewed in many, many different ways. So for example, my governing body is a commission. Maybe some of our senior centers are a board of directors. You can have an advisory council, your mayor's office, county or city government, so on and so forth. So I'm going to kind of speak generally about maybe more toward board of directors, but know that if that's not how your governing body operates, it's not excluded. So a lot of our governing body is made up of volunteers, right? Especially our board of directors. Our commission members are technically volunteers. They're appointed by certain agencies, but they do volunteer for us. But some don't see themselves as volunteers. So just being a member of a board, for example, they're at least showing a willingness to be more active. So sharing accomplishments is a great way to show your governing body what volunteers are doing and how it's impacting the organization. If you can get a volunteer to come in and speak, that would probably be ideal. This way the member can actually talk to the person who's doing the work. So if I had a volunteer come in who does a fitness class for us, our commission members, after our presentation during lunch or breaks, they might be able to do some one-on-one conversations with that volunteer and get a little bit more detail about the achievement and what it takes to be a volunteer for that program. As we've talked in many of our webinars and our research, not all volunteers like to have the spotlight shown, right? So if you can't get a volunteer to speak or come to a meeting, maybe try and get some pictures or some testimonials to share with the group, so that way they can see a little bit more of the volunteer perspective and it not just kind of coming from you directly. So most people are joining the governing body because they have some kind of connection to our mission and our vision of our organization and what our programs do. Others are told, and they have been appointed, so they're voluntold is what I like to say. They don't have much of a choice sometimes. But getting the input from our members of what they feel are the biggest challenges or things that we need to accomplish is a great way to make them feel included and heard. Now, once they tell you, okay, our biggest challenge is making sure people are fed, making sure they have a ride to the doctor, and getting appropriate or accurate healthcare information. Great. We know what your priorities are. Let me tell you how our volunteers are going to help us achieve those goals or get around any of those barriers that you've addressed. And combat those challenges is kind of a cherry on top of the sundae to get our governing bodies buy-in for our program. Always relating it back to the volunteers is a good way to get that buy-in. And then giving them ways to be included is also a really great practice to adopt. So one of the challenges is raising money, for example. You develop an idea for a fundraiser with a larger group of volunteers to support it, to put it on. You have maybe a committee of some kind. Invite that member of the board, commission, whatever you have, of your governing body to the planning meeting, or at the very least, make sure they're able to attend the event, invite them to it. There's so many examples that we can go on and on of how we can include our governing body, but will every member? Oh, I'm being told my audio's going in and out. That's not good. Guess I got to stop moving around so much. Sorry about that. Will every member of our board or our commission get involved? Probably not. Let's be honest. Especially maybe some of those members who may have been voluntold to be on our board. But the most important thing that we can do is ask, right? The worst thing that they can say is no. So showing you want them to be involved is a great way to get their support and buy-in as well. I'm trying to not move as much to fix those audio issues. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So the next people that we need to get buy-in from is staff. So staff includes every paid person that you work with, from your executive director, your supervisor, your coworkers. We need to talk about the barriers that we face with including volunteers from staff perspective, some reasonable, like we've kind of already talked about, others not very realistic. But it's an important part of our jobs that we put kind of those myths to rest. So the staff doesn't have those preconceived notions about volunteers. So communication will be your best friend when it comes to incorporating volunteers into your organization. It may be time to have the meeting with your supervisor, your program managers, to get their input on what volunteers need to know to be the right volunteer. So we've talked about this before, and I believe Keita really hit it home for us in her presentation back in, I believe, February, where we want to look for finding the right volunteers, not just any old volunteer. We don't need, I think last year, kind of the butt in the chair volunteers where we just need a body. We need the right volunteer. So communicating with our staff and saying, we need someone to help with forms or spreadsheets on the computer. Well, the last thing you want to do is match that staff person with a volunteer who has little to no computer skills, right? So we need to get that input from our coworkers to really be able to place them with volunteers who are going to be positive and really help them achieve whatever goal or project that they're working on. Many of us, including myself, can reduce so much stress if we're able to update our screening process. And this isn't an easy task to take on, to update the screening processes that may have been implemented for many, many years. So we've done a good job in going back through our volunteer role descriptions or job descriptions, whatever you call them, to make sure that we're more specific and detailed. I've gotten many emails and comments about how we've updated those things. So these descriptions are really our first impressions that we make to a new volunteer. The first thing that they're going to read, the first thing that they're going to see that says, okay, I can do this or I can't do this. I think most of us can agree that we could beef up our interview process for screening. A lot of us may not do interviews, or maybe we just do it kind of via email, or the application process is more our interview where we get to know our volunteers. And I know taking 10 to 15 minutes to schedule a call with a volunteer about a role seems like a daunting task with everything else that we have on our plates, but it's going to be extremely crucially beneficial. Most of us use the interview process to talk about skills and experience, which is great because we need to know what the volunteer can and maybe cannot do, kind of their strengths and weaknesses. But it's also really good to talk about the culture of our organization. So will they be able to fit into kind of our organizational structure like we've talked about? For example, right now, my agency's moving to a work from home model. So is the volunteer going to be able to work well in a remote setting? We may not be going into the office every time that we need some help. When we do go into the office, we're asked to dress in a more professional standard or professional attire, casual, I guess, business casual, I guess is what I should say. But is that going to be comfortable for the volunteer? Are they going to be able to dress like that? I mean, right now, working from home, I love working in my pajamas. I don't go into the office more than 1 or 2 days a week because I don't want to get out of my pajamas. So a volunteer can be the exact same way. Do we have a strict time policy? We're supposed to be in by 9 and leave by 5. Can a volunteer work in those parameters? So giving the volunteer kind of the heads up of this is kind of what we expect. And if the volunteer says, ooh, I get off work at 4, so I'm really going to only be able to help you guys out between 5 and 7. Well, that's when our work hours ends. Is there something that we can kind of figure out for them to work outside of those parameters? Or if that's a parameter that's got to really kind of be set in stone, then volunteer may not be a right fit for us. Training is extremely important in as volunteers work for our agencies. Even if a volunteer is only helping with your program, only helping with your specific program, we need to train the staff at our agencies to know how to interact with a volunteer. Some staff people have never worked with volunteers before. So back when we first started the series, gosh, January of 2020 sounds so long ago. I took a poll with some of us who stuck with me over this, last year and a half. But we took a poll kind of getting our volunteer management experience before we got the job to work directly with volunteers, and kind of asked how many years you've had in the volunteer management world. And many of us said, I haven't. So I've never worked with volunteers before. So if our job is to work with volunteers, but we didn't have the experience, we can only imagine kind of the hesitancy our staff and coworkers have to working with volunteers if they haven't had any kind of formal training. There's no degree in volunteer management when you go to college. There's a couple other certifications that we'll talk about. But really training the staff, and it doesn't have to be super in depth either. You just hit the high notes. You don't want to overwhelm them with kind of volunteer management jargon. I'm throwing a lot at you every month, but that's because we work directly with our volunteers. So something to consider when you're training staff on volunteer engagement is why we have volunteers here. Do they know why? What do we expect of them to do and not to do? Best practices for interacting, like saying hi and introducing yourself, asking staff to thank volunteers if they see them in the office. That'll go a long way in keeping our volunteers and our staff, the relationships good, and keeping the volunteers around because we're actually acknowledging their presence. Reassuring staff, making sure they know everything's going to be okay. We're going to have volunteers in the office, but don't worry. Volunteers are not bad. Share stories and data of why volunteers are important for our work. Let them know the volunteers are not here to take their jobs. Debunk that possible myth in the back of their head right away. Nip it in the bud as soon as you can. But if you need, so they're not here to take your job, but if you need some help, they're a vital resource that can help you achieve more than you could possibly have dreamed. However, we also have to be realistic, right? So it's not that not all volunteers will have the same set of skills. But going back to the communication that we talked about a little while ago, we're going to know in advance what that staff person needs, and we can better find someone to help them that's a good fit. You can make this training or this part of training by trying to be a little more fun than intimidating. So maybe do like the Mythbusters kind of thing, like true or false. The volunteers are here to take your job. And if a lot of your staff say true, whew, that's not good. But, kind of making it a little bit more fun, a little more lighthearted, not as serious. It's also important to not paint only the pretty things about working with volunteers. Let's be honest, in most cases, our volunteers are going to make things so much better in a lot of cases. But if there's ever an issue, you want to make sure that you're there to help and work things out. Volunteers are going to make mistakes. Volunteers aren't perfect. Staff are going to make mistakes. We're all human. And they'll show up late, maybe leave a little early when they're not supposed to, and that can cause some tension. But it's important that you have open communication and are available to talk to either the staff or the volunteer who may have concerns to help get them to work it out. If it's really not working, you can kind of make sure you get both sides of the story, and there may need to be kind of a reassignment or a retraining. We talked about that a few months ago. But making sure that you're, whether it's a tiny concern or a big concern, that you're always there to lend an ear and just hear everybody out. So just like with staff, communication is going to be key in getting buy-in from our volunteers. If this last year has shown us anything, it's the importance of communication and the different ways that we can do it, right? Being as transparent as possible will help build the trust with your volunteers, and they're not going to feel like they're left in the dark or resentful for not being included in certain discussions. This gets easier said than done, right? We want our volunteers to be included in conversations and know what's going on, but there may be some things that we can't communicate outside of just general paid staff. But as transparent as we can be is really important. You don't have to do all the talking. I mean, contrary to what I like to do, I'm a talker. But it's important to also listen and truly hear the concerns of volunteers that they may have. Same thing with staff. Many of us have our go-to volunteers who we rely on a lot for activities, or when we're in a bind, we ask them to step up. That volunteer may feel obligated to say yes, or you may not ask them again, or they may feel obligated to say yes. And if they say no, they may feel guilty, or that we're not going to ask them again to help. I'm really fumbling on my words today. I apologize. So we need to hear what a volunteer says. Well, for example, I have a lot on my plate, but I guess I can help, or something along those lines. I've had a volunteer say to me that I missed a family function because I was volunteering, but it's okay. Well, that makes me feel like crap. So we really need to try and listen. And, we set our own boundaries, right? I tell volunteers, here's my cell phone number. I stop working at 5, so if you call me after, I might answer, but odds are I won't, and I'll give you a call back the next day. So if we set boundaries, we need to be able to hear and listen to the boundaries that our volunteers set. And we need to encourage them to set those boundaries with us sometimes, and that it's okay to say no and not feel guilty. That'll keep them in the program. They'll buy in to maybe even helping more if they know that they're not going to be in trouble or looked bad or maybe looked down upon, I guess, for saying no to something, even if we're kind of desperate. But we have to understand. We talk about this a lot as well, and it also relates to listening. But we need to allow our volunteers to be able to give feedback on the program, our activities, events, or heck, even how we're doing. If we want their buy-in to keep them in the program, we have to listen to their input and do as much as we can to make changes to accommodate them. Of course, I'm not talking about, changing every little thing. If a volunteer asks you to do something, you have to do it. But as much as we can, trying to help make our volunteers' lives a little bit easier is going to keep them around a lot longer. So I have a mantra that if I can make my job a little harder to make a volunteer's job easier, let's get it done. Notice how I just said a little harder. I'm not talking, making my job a headache every day. But just little adjustments of how I do my day-to-day tasks isn't going to be hard for me necessarily. So an example, we have a program where volunteers call people each week and we ask them to complete a form so we can kind of track the data and they do kind of a screening and assessment every time they call a person. Well, we all know the struggles of getting volunteers to report data, right? That's probably one of our biggest struggles that we try and overcome all the time. So quite a few of our volunteers struggle with this documentation, and the volunteers who've shown me that they're reliable, they do their work well, they know their role in terms of their duties and responsibilities, I personally ask them, is it easier for me to send you a monthly check-in rather than you having to fill out this report every week? And in exchange for me asking you for a monthly report, I'll do that data recording for you. Holy cow, that was a game changer, where it makes, me a little bit another step in my job where I got to set calendar reminders and I got to remember, okay, don't forget to send Jamie this email every Friday before the end of the month or whatever. But it's really helped. Our volunteers have stayed longer. They have a more buy-in in the program. They've asked for more people to call because they don't have to worry about kind of reporting in a more strenuous way. So it really helped those volunteers get buy-in for the program. And we also want to play to our volunteers' strengths. We ask them to complete an application, and hopefully we're going to start doing a better job with our interviews in the near future. And we're really going to get to know what our volunteers are best at. Most of the volunteers want to use the skills that they already have. And while they're in the process of using their skills, maybe learning a little something new along the way as well. When we talk to the volunteers and get a feel for a good placement based on their experience, tell them about the opportunities and maybe say something. This is just an example. It sounds like you're really great at talking with people. I think you'd be a really great driver for our My Ride program, and you would really connect with our riders. You'd be able to stay with them and kind of have that conversation, or you'd be great at delivering a meal and making sure and checking in our clients, making sure that they're okay. This always goes back to the listening as well, as you can tell, that you may have the wrong assumption and that the volunteer can tell you, well, maybe I don't want to sit with someone while they're waiting for the doctor. I'm not that good of a communicator where I can fill that much time, but I would like to deliver that meal and just kind of check on someone for a quick 5-minute check-in. So we can kind of, here's what I'm hearing, and kind of check with them to see if we're interpreting them correctly. And if we are, great. If not, hopefully they'll be comfortable enough with us to give us a little bit more information so we can really find that right fit for them. So all of those things will help us get our buy-in from our volunteers. Now that we've talked about each group, in a roundabout way individually as well. We need to bring everyone together to feel more comfortable. So this should happen during many of the different stages of volunteer engagement. So this isn't kind of a one and done. Bringing everybody together, your staff, your governing body, and your volunteers is going to be done throughout the engagement process. And when I say engagement process, I mean the volunteer engagement process. We're not doing any kind of proposals or anything like that. So during orientation is a really good way to have maybe your executive director, your supervisor, maybe a board member or a commission member participate and do a welcome or opening remarks. Lately we haven't necessarily been able to see one another in person. So maybe if someone's willing to record a video, that would be a good substitute. But really getting them to participate early in the process, because the volunteers will instantly know that the volunteer program is important because upper management is being present and involved. Many orientations also include a tour of the office and some staff introductions. So this is unique to some of our programs because not all of our programs have a central office necessarily. But I'm thinking maybe for, like meal delivery, you'll have the orientation at the nutrition site, be able to see kind of where the kitchen is and things of that nature. Or at our senior center, you'll be able to kind of give a little tour of the senior center and here's where we do this class and exercise and all of those things. So if you have kind of that central location, I think that would be a really great thing to add to your orientation. Key staff should also be available as much as possible. So for example, if we're doing an agency-wide orientation, so I know we have two staff people at our area agencies on aging and disability who are the agency-wide volunteer program coordinators. If they're going to do an orientation to kind of give volunteers an idea of every possible volunteer opportunity the agency has, make sure you have your CREVA advocate, your guardianship coordinator, your ombudsman, any kind of transportation coordinators, your SHIP coordinators, Meals on Wheels, and any other program represented. So volunteers have a face-to-face name who they may be working with. This doesn't mean that the staff people have to attend the entire orientation, but at least the people who are like, I think I want to work with guardianship or ombudsman. Great, I know that I'm gonna contact Caroline or I'm gonna contact Tika. Then I'm just kind of throwing out names that I know at the state level. Of course, the names are gonna be different at the regional and local levels. But that person will automatically be able to kind of see who they may be working with and get a face to that voice or a face to that name. If you have a receptionist or if someone works the front desk, maybe you have multiple people who kind of rotate, they're likely going to be the people who are going to greet anyone who comes into the office. So it's really good to introduce them to the group. This is Mary, and probably anytime you come into the office, she's going to be the first one that you see. So make sure you sign in. She'll have a sign-in sheet and kind of walk through that process. Mary will get to know some faces and say, okay, I recognize you. You must be a volunteer. And then the volunteers will also know Mary and how important she is. Training is when staff and volunteers will get more familiar with one another. Orientation, it's kind of like the first date. You're not going to get too in depth. You're not going to ask all those serious questions. But program staff will be responsible for that training. So, we had our orientation and you learned about all the programs. Now I want to do SHIP. So I'm going to be able to see, Helen and Mary Ann. I know those are the two that I'm going to be working with mainly. And that's going to be at our training where I'm going to specifically, know which staff I'll be working mainly with. And the staff is going to set the tone. We also be able to see volunteers more in action during our trainings. So are they engaged? Are they asking questions? Do they have really good input? If we do kind of role-playing games or something like that, who's going to volunteer and step up and do those role-playing or those skits or those case studies that we do? Is someone on their phone the whole time? Are they really paying attention? Did somebody fall asleep? I have definitely done trainings where people have fallen asleep. I'm hoping no one's asleep right now. But all of these things we can kind of make a mental note of on how it could affect working with an individual. So if someone fell asleep, thanks, Adrian, I appreciate that. So we know, if someone's not really paying attention, do we want to match them with the staff person who's really detail oriented and is really on their game and really wants someone who's engaged? Probably not. When a volunteer is assigned to their role in their activity, each party is going to be able to adjust more. So the staff's going to be able to adjust more to the volunteer to the staff, and kind of get into a groove and a flow of how to work together. So embracing these successes, but also preparing for the bumps in the road as well. Yes, they went through the training. Volunteers are still going to have questions. They're going to ask you the same question many times, most likely. Same with volunteers. They may get frustrated with us that we asked them to do something that we didn't properly or really prepare them for like we thought we did. So including them in the process of developing roles and learning things together will help make them feel more involved and really get that buy-in into the program, that their voice is being heard. And I've personally helped make this volunteer role better for future volunteers who are going to participate. Time for change. So when important discussions come up, like program changes and updates, it's really important that the staff and volunteers work together to talk through any struggles that may be coming. We don't know for sure what obstacles that we're going to face, but we can try and predict the future. It's likely that X is going to happen. How are we going to try to either avoid it or work through it? One of the programs that I manage is having our funding run out at the end of the month. So I'm extremely fortunate that I'll still be able to work with the program kind of part-time going forward. However, I know this is going to be a big change for all 80 plus volunteers that we have in the program. So we have a quarterly meeting and we talk about some of the changes, how they felt about it, what they wanted to see moving forward. Knowing that my time will be cut a little bit, I may not have as much time dedicated, and kind of preparing them for that. So it was a really great discussion that led to everyone, to my pleasant surprise, agreeing that even though we're adjusting slightly, we're going to continue to do kind of the same reporting and the same data collection procedures that I thought we might have to adjust kind of a lot more. So when we apply for funding in the future, we'll be able to, we won't have to do as many major adjustments. So they felt better about the program having their input be heard and their buy-in and kind of communication flow being very open. It also reminds me of when I worked with the SHIP program, and I know many people in the SHIP program who are on still may have slight resentment to me for this, but we were required to implement testing for our volunteer training. And it wasn't a super positive conversation, let's admit it. But the situation was slightly different. So this became a new mandate from our funders that we had to implement this. The good thing was we were able to set the parameters of how to administer the testing to the volunteers, and we did our best to make it as simple as possible. For example, it's open book, open note, open internet. So we're not making them memorize any of the facts. They can do it in groups of volunteers if they wanted to. Only the only people they couldn't ask the answers are from paid staff, which is reasonable. You can't ask us the answers to the questions. Some volunteers, we were pleasantly surprised, really enjoyed the annual refresher, and it helped them to improve their confidence and let them know, yes, I do know what I'm talking about. I am going to be helpful when I counsel someone on Medicare. Others didn't like it so much. One volunteer even called me evil. I think they were only half joking, but it's okay because they passed the exam anyway. So we get called a lot of different things. But when we all come together, staff and volunteers can really build a sense of community where we know that no one is out for someone's job, or we're not spying. I don't have, I didn't bug your office, Keita, or anything like that. We're all working together. And with buy-in comes trust in one another, and having the opportunity to come together for meetings or trainings, potlucks, or just coffee is a great way to break down any barriers that could be growing and prevent those any kind of walls from going up. So I know some of us have done this with virtual meetings that maybe we talk to our volunteers every month. If you notice a trend, or you hear in some of the things through the grapevine that so and so really doesn't like working with this person because they have a bad attitude or everything seems to be so negative, rather than calling those people out, definitely don't do that. But you may want to say, let's have a meeting. You can make it great, and we're going to go over ways to kind of work together better. Slight update training, but making it fun, not making it serious, and just having that open dialogue. So one thing that I do want to bring up, because we've talked a lot here about volunteers coming to get paid staff people's jobs, and we know that that's not the motive, but volunteers can become staff many of the time. So it can happen, and it's not because of the fear that a volunteer is going to replace a staff person. It's really important for us to, again, reiterate this to staff, that staff have nothing to fear from the volunteer program. It is possible that an organization is so well run and the volunteers have contributed to meeting program goals that actually new jobs are created at the organization. This is in many, many studies, they've shown that because certain volunteer programs have been so successful and they've brought in more donations and things of that nature, that actually a volunteer program can create more paid jobs, which is great, right? That's the ideal. So it's not that volunteers are trying to take someone's position, but they may actually help us be able to create new positions. An effective volunteer program, I already said that, right? Going through my notes, making sure I didn't miss anything. We also have the situation where a staff person may be leaving the organization because of retirement or another opportunity, or you win the lottery and then you're not gonna keep your position anymore. So it's great to have a volunteer who may be a possible candidate to fill that position, right? Again, the volunteer is not the cause or the reason the paid position is becoming available. But thinking back to our first webinar, I believe when I asked some of you about your volunteer stories and how you got into the field of volunteer engagement, there was at least a handful of you that said, I was a volunteer for the program and then I applied and got to be a paid staff person. So I can think of a couple people off the top of my head, but I'm not going to speak for them. But that's also a possibility, that if there's a job vacancy, the volunteer knows a little bit more about the organization's structure, their culture. They know a little bit about how things are run. They're familiar with some of the staff people. Hopefully the staff people know them. And it can really be a smooth transition to getting a volunteer to maybe fill any kind of vacancies that may be at the organization. So just saying that this is a possibility. We actually have real life examples. But it shouldn't go, hopefully it won't go to that fear and a bad volunteer staff relationship. Hopefully it'll frame it in a more positive way. So in closing, we definitely want to be prepared. So everyone knows our program goals, our mission, our vision, and no one's going to know those things better than you all, or better than us. So we'll be able to answer any questions that are thrown at us about why our volunteer programs deserve the buy-in from the people, the person, or the group that we need it from. Always be prepared. Debunk those silly myths, do the mythbuster thing, true or false. Everyone will have concerns, whether it's a staff working with volunteers or volunteers working with staff or volunteers working with volunteers. So we play a vital role in nurturing those relationships to make them successful and impactful. Embrace those concerns. They're going to come up. Will all staff and volunteer pairs, matches, groups work well together? No, let's be honest with ourselves. We have discussed ways to prevent the conflict and have a better method of positive volunteer staff relationships as much as we can, maybe through that more comprehensive screening process, training staff on ways to work with volunteers better, bringing everyone together at different stages of the volunteer engagement. All of those things can hopefully stop any of those concerns from growing or even happening. And last but not least, allow everyone to come together is a great way to make everyone feel included And when everyone feels included, we have their buy-in, and they're going to be willing and accepting to be actively support and participate in our volunteer program, and making it come full circle with our buy-in definition. So that's kind of the meat of the presentation for the buy-in. I'm going to go over some updates now for a little bit. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to type those into the chat box, and we'll open it up for questions if you want to unmute yourself here in a minute. But I do have a couple kind of upcoming trainings and further education if anyone is interested. So the Points of Light conference, we talked about this a couple months ago, but this conference is the largest volunteer management conference in the world. And it's through the course Points of Light. It's July 14th to the 16th, and it's virtual. Registration's $149 now through July 12th, so you can register up to the week of the conference. It is going to be the same time as our next webinar next month, but hey, that's why we record everything, right? And hopefully the audio comes through a little bit better than what I've been told. It's a great conference. I've gone the past few years, both I've attended in person and virtually, and it's really, really a great opportunity. So if you have the resources, I encourage you guys to attend that if you can, even if it means missing this series. I won't hold it against you. Volunteer Pro is also an amazing resource for volunteer engagement. Toby Johnson was the founder of Volunteer Pro, and she used to work as a state director for the SHIP program, and she's actually lives in Knoxville, so she's a vital, really great resource for volunteer engagement. While there is a membership fee to join Volunteer Pro, sometimes they have free webinars and other trainings available. And one's coming up that I've registered for and I'm really excited about. Get your volunteer program back on track: 4 little-known secrets to rebuild an enthusiastic, committed, and reliable dream team. So I think that's also going to kind of play into our buy-in conversation. So if you're available, it's going to be offered multiple dates. June 29th, July 7th, and July 9th. So I have kind of the links to all these things that I'll send out hopefully this afternoon once I have everything posted. So you'll be able to, if you're interested in any of these things, you can go ahead and register. The last thing, the Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration will have another window to take the Certified Volunteer Administrator exam this fall. So anyone interested in being certified or learning more about it, they have an information session coming up on July 13th and August 10th. Applications to take the exam for the fall are due September 1st. No pressure. This is not a requirement. If you don't want to take the exam, no big deal. I just want to let you guys know that it's available. We've started a great CVA study group that meets monthly right now, but probably closer to the exam time, we'll probably be meeting weekly or every other week. To help everyone kind of prepare who wants to take the exam. We have a lot of fun. I think we have a couple members on the call with us right now. So it's, me, Keita, Glenda Temple, Janet Sullivan, Lou Cottle, and Rebecca Nofi. So if anyone wants to join us, we have a really fun time. We're happy to, we just like to get together and kind of learn from each other, talk things through. So if you're interested in joining our study group, feel free to shoot me an email or anything like that, and I'll give you some more details. So those are the big training educations. I do want to give you just a small update. Gosh, back last year, we talked about developing a volunteer impact report, and I got a lot of really good positive feedback from you guys of how great that would be. And it's finally happening. Way later than I wanted it to happen, let's be honest. But again, I can give you any excuse in the book, but the reality is I just dropped the ball again. So I'm batting 1,000 here, and I'm trying to redeem myself for everything that I've kind of dropped here lately. But I'm not sure when it's actually going to be ready to be released. But I can tell you that we've got a lot of really, really great data, and I can't wait to share it. I thought we were doing amazing when we back, I believe in January, I gave you guys the last update. We had 3,100 volunteers as of January 2020 or in 2020 as of January of this year. Well, we've really stepped that up, and I've contacted individuals and program staff. And thank you all so much for contributing to this report. We've over doubled that number. So as of right now, we're looking at 7,350 volunteers who contributed over 268,000 hours of volunteer services for all of our programs. That doesn't include all of our programs. It doesn't include all of our local sites. But man, these are numbers that are more than I could have ever imagined. And I can't wait to really get this formatting together and be able to showcase everyone. So thank you guys for your patience and understanding as I work to continue to make this happen. But we're doing it. It's coming. I'm excited. Just want to let you guys know our next webinar is going to be July 15th, same time, same place, wherever you're at. I don't know. I'm at home. And we're going to discuss volunteer leadership development. So please also remember, if you have a speaker that you'd like us to include in next year's series, it's never too late to start planning. Maybe you have a great topic that you want to present on, or maybe you attend one of these great trainings or educational events and you hear a great discussion that you think the group would benefit from. We want to know. So this is me, practicing what I preach and trying to get you all to buy in to the webinar series. So if you have any insight on that, please feel free to share. And thank you all so much as always. I love talking with this group. You guys have great insights. If you need anything from me, let me know, and I'll hang around for questions. So I didn't see any questions coming in through the chat box, but feel free to unmute yourself and we can kind of have some discussion. But it's 11:05. We're usually here until about 11:30, but I know people hate when presentations end early, right? But yeah, I'll hang out. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to start the discussions.